Fourth, Rachel Maskell, who was one of the most outspoken against the changes, says she stands by her decision.
When the evidence was so strong that people would die as a result of these changes, having money taken away from them, people we know have serious mental health challenges. So I could not have on my conscience something where we know that people would take their own lives.
A watchdog says the government's anti-terror programme should focus on preventing violence as a whole. Lord Anderson says Prevent should be open to those with no fixed ideology. Downing Street says the Prime Minister is angry after learning about the Afghan data breach. Sir Keir Starmer says former Conservative ministers have serious questions to answer after thousands of people were put at risk. And Emma Watson has been banned from driving after doing 38 miles per hour in a 30 zone in Oxford. Her Harry Potter co-star Zoe Wanamaker was also banned in the same court on the same day following a separate speeding offence. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 11 points at 89.26. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.15. LBC weather: light rain across Wales and southwest England tonight. A few showers for Northern Ireland. Lows of 9 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, tonight with Andrew Marr.
Conversation with a member of the Cabinet about the problem of the 100 or so potential Labour rebel MPs after that revolt over benefits. And I was told the clever strategy was to ignore the very hard left, but for everybody else to make nice, to reach out to them, tell them they were being heard, and if necessary, dangle job offers, which seemed sensible to me. And then suddenly this afternoon, 4 Labour MPs who had organised against the benefit reforms were called in by the whips and suspended from the Parliamentary Labour Party. Exactly the opposite approach. Bold move, I thought, at a time when Jeremy Corbyn's planning a new breakaway socialist party, which pollsters predict would win 15% of the vote, and when Labour is losing so many votes to the left. One senior Labour MP said to me just now, "Don't understand this. Labour MPs are allowed to organise, surely?" Anyway, let's talk first this evening to one of those who had the whip withdrawn, Brian Leishman, MP for Alloa and Grangemouth. He came in to tell me about exactly what happened when he was called into the Chief Whip's office this afternoon.
It's been a dreadful day, to be honest. Not to put too fine a point on it, I'm devastated at my suspension. So after PMQs today, I was called in and I was told it was for continuous breaches of party discipline. I have voted against the government, I think it's a dozen times, and I have been outspoken about some of the missteps, I would say, in media appearances and outlets such as yourself.
We're talking above all about the benefits revolt. Was that, in your view, what provoked this?
Well, there's been a few. Certainly from a constituency point of view, I've obviously had the closure of the Grangemouth refinery, and I have been vocal since coming down last July in saying that the government didn't do enough to save the refinery. In fact, it was a Scottish Labour promise at the time that we would step in and save the jobs at the refinery, and we haven't done that. So I've been beyond disappointed at that. But yes, there has been other things. I've been outspoken about the treatment of WASPy women, the cuts to overseas development aid, and of course recently the welfare reforms.
So you go in and it's yourself and the Chief Whip. Was it a proper conversation? In other words, did you get a chance to make your point and explain why you had done what you had done? Absolutely,
yes. It was myself, Chief Whip, and yes, we had a frank and honest back and forward. Pleasant enough, and I've asked for a letter just detailing exactly what's going to happen next, because in the raw of emotion of the moment, it's quite easy to miss out a few of the details. So I've asked for that letter, and I want to see exactly how I can plot my course back into the Parliamentary Labour Party.
So you're determined, as it were, to behave well in their terms and to find your way back into the Labour Party to get the whip back? Because this is a temporary suspension, it's not forever.
It's a temporary suspension pending investigation into the things that I have said in the Chamber and out with the Chamber, but I'll make no bones about it, Andrew. I'm there to represent the people of Alloa and Grangemouth, whether they voted for me or not. So I will continue doing exactly that in Parliament and outside of Parliament, because I think it's incumbent on backbench MPs to obviously most importantly, represent their constituents and their constituency, but also to be that kind of guiding compass for the party, and actually highlight when things are not right, that maybe we should be plotting a different course.
It could be said that it's quite a bold thing by the Labour Party to do this at a time when Jeremy Corbyn is talking about a new party to the left which would get 15% of the vote, and when the Labour Party is losing so many votes to the left, including to the Greens. Is there any part of you that would stand outside the Labour Party in future?
Andrew, I've been consistent in what I said. I joined the party in 2016 and I was a lifelong Labour voter before that. And I joined the party because I'm fiercely anti-austerity, and I believe in the redistribution of wealth and power across society for the benefit of the many. I still think that the Labour Party is the vehicle for that social change and actually making Britain a much more equal place.
So you have no intention of moving or being drawn away from the Labour Party?
I might have my whip removed from me temporarily and suspended, but I'm still a Labour Party member. I will still be out canvassing for some of the fantastic candidates that we have already for the Holyrood elections next year, and I will still be attending CLPs. I'm a proud Labour Party member.
And if the Chief Whip says to you, all I want from you now, Brian, is an absolute promise not to rebel against the party again, can you give him that promise?
No, and I don't think anyone could, in all honesty, because we don't know what's going to be coming down the line. And of course, I think that the real question that you're putting forward there, Andrew, is a critical one for the future of any political party, but especially this Labour Party. Internal party democracy. If I can maybe hark back to a previous Labour Prime Minister, Harold Wilson, the party is like a bird. It cannot fly in one wing alone. What we've got to have that broad spectrum of ideas and views. That's just what makes for good health in a political party.
Do you think there's an atmosphere of intolerance now in Keir Starmer's Labour Party?
Well, it's very difficult to comment on exactly what the Prime Minister's view is on that because, unfortunately, we don't really have a personal relationship. Beyond my PMQs, of which I had one today, actually, which has been somewhat overshadowed now in today's news, unfortunately, I don't have a personal relationship with the Prime Minister, so I really don't know what his views are on that.
So this has happened to 4 of you this afternoon. Have you any sense that this is going wider still?
I don't know. I think it's a moving situation, as you would say in the media. But what I will say is the 3 other Labour Party members. I'm friendly with them all, and I have to say they're fantastic parliamentarians. Rachel Maskell has been for quite some time an outstanding voice for her community in Parliament, and Chris Hinchliffe and Neil Duncan-Jordan are new intake, same as me, the 2024 intake, and they've made their mark in Parliament in a very, very positive way, and I'm sure that their communities are delighted to have them as their representative.
And would you say that on those issues you rebelled on, whether it's the benefits vote, whether it's the Wasabi women, whether it's the winter fuel, or whether it's Grangemouth, that these are all examples of proper Labour values that you were standing up for?
I would say so. These are the true, real Labour Party values that when I go to my CLPs, they talk about the members, the fantastic grassroots memberships of our organisation. They still hold so dear. That passion for social justice, equality, the redistribution of wealth and power across society for everyone's benefit in the community, they don't go out of fashion. They're still real Labour Party values.
And what's next for Brian Leishman?
Well, the rest of this week in Parliament, back to the constituency. We've got some fantastic constituency events on this weekend. And then I will come back down, and I've got Monday, Tuesday in Parliament next week. And then it'll be a summer recess. But in the grand scheme of things, I'll still continue doing what I've always done and represent my communities. And
in your mind, you're still a Labour MP?
Absolutely, a proud Labour Party member. And when I take my place in the Commons, I will feel like a Labour MP.
Brian Leishman, thank you very much indeed on a difficult day for coming in to talk to LBC.
Thank you.
Now, one of the first journalists to get across this story was our very own political correspondent, Aggie Shornbray, who is with me in the studio right now. Aggie, I suppose what the government would say they're doing is literally cracking the whip. In other words, there has been a sort of steady growth of ill discipline, people voting against the government, maybe up to 100 MPs now, and they had to do something.
I think that is the feeling. And I think even lots of Labour MPs, lots of backbenchers felt that it was necessary for them to do something. I think there's quite a lot of confusion about the timing. Some Labour MPs say they expected them to take action against what happened in the welfare vote, but expected that to happen immediately. We're now a fortnight on from that. But whether or not this will work, I think we will have to see. There is some Labour MPs, not necessarily on the left of the party, who are concerned about this and worried about whether or not this will work. And it's worth noting as well that we're a year on from that first bunch of suspending the whip. So last July, Sir Keir Starmer suspended the whip from 7 Labour MPs, and 5 of those Labour MPs got the whip back. And it was interesting speaking to them, actually, because they still got those text messages from the whip saying this is the way you should be voting through their 6-month suspensions. And if they followed the whip then they were actually rewarded at the end with a place back on the Labour benches. But the kind of worry from lots of those MPs today about this is that it's a misjudgment, it's an extremely poor political decision by the leadership. And from everyone I've spoken to, I don't think anybody thinks this is a decision by the whips. You heard Brian Leishman saying there that he was
He's not going to stop rebelling, is he?
No, he's not going to stop rebelling. But everybody thinks this is come from Number 10. This has come from the very top. And as one left-wing Labour MP said to me, it's almost the political equivalent of putting a hand on a spike instead of a head on a spike to discourage other Labour MPs from rebelling in the future. Because there is this idea as well that, especially with assisted dying, where there was this big vote of conscience, lots of Labour MPs felt they needed to learn how to think for themselves and work out exactly what to do on issues, and that has then bled into other areas.
I'm really interested you raised that, Aggie, because I think that assisted dying vote has been much more important in the story of this government than perhaps people had realised, because an awful lot of people, on the losing side in particular, walked through the opposite voting chambers to the Prime Minister and most of the Cabinet and were very distressed afterwards and have been, as it were, forming relationships outside the formal parts of the Labour Party.
I think that's completely right. And also working out how to whip themselves as well. So backbenchers working out how to form WhatsApp groups, how to form cliques, how to kind of make alliances outside of the normal suspects. Whereas normally, especially if you're a new MP, and it's worth noting that 3 out of the 4 of the MPs that have been suspended aren't new MPs. They're not that, well, they're well known because they've been those people that are on LBC a lot, on TV a lot, but they're not well known in the sense that if you compare them to one of the other big rebels on the welfare vote, Meg Hillier are, and they don't have that kind of, that they're not seen as much of an organiser, as well respected in the Labour Party. And I wonder whether that's part of the reason they've chosen these 4 when...
Relatively easy to pick off.
Well, indeed. And, you know, we did, of course, have over 120 Labour MPs signing that reasoned amendments. They had numerous MPs to choose from.
And looking forward, obviously it's going to be a tough autumn with the budget coming up, but there's also the SEND vote, the special educational needs vote coming out, which could be very difficult.
Very difficult. And I think it just continues. And I think this is why Number 10 felt they needed to do something. And time will tell whether or not this is effective or not, because we can already see into the future, and Labour MPs can already see into the future about what the next topics will be. And if there's already, people always say, if you rebel once, it's much easier to rebel again. And I wonder whether that's part of the assisted dying vote as well. Exactly to your point. You walk in the opposite lobby to the Prime Minister, you can do it again.
You can do it again, absolutely. Well, it's a very, very important moment in Keir Starmer's handling of this parliamentary party. I said at the beginning that I thought the idea was to be nice to people, but there's a fair amount of that going on alongside this. There are people who are being brought into conversations and treated with more respect.
Definitely. I mean, they've literally handpicked these 4 MPs and suspended the whip from them. A lot of the other ones are actually getting a lot more time, a lot more contact with the Prime Minister, being invited into Number 10, ask their opinions, ask their thoughts. And as one of them said to me today, that's brilliant, as long as they actually listen to my thoughts. And they haven't seen any evidence of that yet.
Maybe they will in due course. Aggie Chambray, thank you very much indeed. Up next, after horrific cases such as the murder of the Tory MP David Amess and the Southport killings last year, the government has ordered a review into the failings of our terrorism tracking body, Prevent. The man who authored that review will be with me in just a few minutes. You're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr, and the time now is 6:15.
This is LBC.
of July.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
Here's a difficult question. What is a terrorist? You might think the answer is obvious. Someone who murders or creates mayhem in pursuit of an ideology. So go after Al-Qaeda, go after the Nazis. The trouble is, as the horrific Southport killings a year ago showed us, not everyone who is dangerous has clear political or religious beliefs. Some just get fixated on extreme violence after watching online material. Do you remember the Netflix series Adolescence?
Never left his room. He'd come home, slam the door straight up the stairs on the computer. I'd see the light on at 1 o'clock in the morning. And I'd knock and I'd say, Jamie, come on, son, you've got school tomorrow. And the lights would turn off, but he never said nothing.
We couldn't do nothing about that. All kids are like that these days, aren't they? You know, you don't know what they're watching in their room, love. Could be watching porn or anything, do you know what I mean? Look at that fella that popped up on my phone, going on about how to treat women and how men should be men and all that. I was only looking for something for the gym, wasn't I? You can't keep an eye on them all the time, love. We just can't.
Well, a year ago, Lord Anderson, the former Independent Reviewer of Terrorism legislation, was asked by the government to review failures by the Prevent programme. That's the one that's supposed to catch and stop would-be terrorists early on. He was asked to review the murder of David Amis, the MP killed by an Islamist who'd been referred to Prevent by his school, and the Southport killings by Axel Rudakabana, who had been referred to Prevent 3 times by his school. Now, we'll come back to those in a moment, but to give you a sense of the difficulty of deciding who is a potential terrorist, here are 4 more names. Daniel Hussein murdered 2 sisters at a park in Wembley in 2020 as a human sacrifice to help him win the lottery. He was interested not just in far-right material, but Satanism and the occult. Jake Davison shot and killed 5 people in Plymouth a year later. He was obsessed with firearms and incel culture. Emal Al-Swilman was an asylum seeker who detonated an explosion outside Liverpool Women's Hospital in the same year. Police said he had a grievance against the British state and was mentally ill. Finally, Damon Smith left a rucksack bomb on the London Tube in 2016. He had been a Christian altar boy who went on to the Quran and was fascinated in mass murders. If the makings of terrorism are so widespread, how in the real world is it possible to get them all before it's too late? Well, the Independent Prevent Commissioner, Lord David Anderson, joins me in the studio now. Lord Anderson, very good of you to come in. Going to that, the big question I asked at the end there, if terrorism is now carried out by so many people with so many different motivations, without an ideology, without necessarily a network or a big book at home, it's much, much harder to find them.
Yeah, 15, 20 years ago, everybody knew what a terrorist looked like. It was either what was still going on in Northern Ireland, or it was people here in cells, in the name of Islam, very often doing the bidding of the likes of Al-Qaeda or ISIS. That's completely changed, really, for 2 reasons. And the first is the growth of the lone actor, the person who can act on their own, using a readily available weapon like a knife or a motor vehicle. And the second is this fragmentation of ideologies. Yes, we are still seeing Islamists, and it's very important to keep an eye on the Islamist terrorist threat. And of course, we still see neo-Nazis and people of the far right. But so many young people, and I'm talking now teenagers, and the average age of someone who gets to Prevent is now 16. They have a mishmash of ideologies. It's a bit of this, it's a bit of that. It's fueled by conspiracy theories, some of them probably fostered by hostile states. There's a strong element of personal grievance. It all gets messed up, and it comes out at once.
And sometimes a kind of addiction just to images of extreme violence and mass killing.
That's absolutely right. And to the credit of the Prevent people, they did identify, both in the police and in the Home Office, as early as 2019, that there was this category of, if you like, violence-fascinated individuals, people who were obsessed with extreme violence or mass casualty attacks. And they recommended even then that those people were eligible for Prevent. Unfortunately, that message hasn't always got very clearly through.
Well, now we come to, for instance, the Amis killing, Sir David Amis, whose killer was sent to Prevent. And you say that the sort of control of him, or the oversight of him, kind of petered out.
Yeah, I mean, the killer of David Amess was a classic old-style Islamist terrorist. He got his propaganda from Islamic State. He swallowed it whole. And the problem there was Prevent did everything right until they fixed him up with a mentor. They signed a contract for 7 sessions with the mentor, and the mentor met him once in McDonald's in Croydon. They had a pleasant chat about his faith, and the decision then seems to have been taken that there wasn't really a problem and nothing more was needed.
Clearly a major mistake. I must put to you, the Amess family have put out a statement, you've probably seen it, saying they're deeply upset, hurt and frankly offended by the way the publication of your report has been handled by the Home Office. They were given next to no notice of the timing of the publication, or worse, any meaningful advance sight of the report. And they say they have the right, just like any other bereaved family, to have it properly explained to them why the man who killed him was allowed to slip through the state's safeguarding net, who's accountable for it, and what's being done to ensure no other family suffers the same way. And they've called for a public inquiry. So I must ask you for your reaction to that.
I've got a lot of time for Lady Amess and the family, and I've got a lot of sympathy for them. I've met them, and I wrote them a letter yesterday telling them what I was saying in my report. I think they had an advance copy as well, but that came from the Home Office. That wasn't for me. My advice to them, if they want to understand more about how Sir David came to die, is that the focus now has to be on the 5 years between the discharge from Prevent and the murder itself. Nobody knows a great deal about what this man was doing during those 5 years, and I suspect that the key to what was in his mind is going to come from a proper independent study of that period, something the Home Secretary is actually already committed to doing.
And in the Rudder-Kobane case, in many ways, it's even more worrying because he was referred 3 times, and yet he wasn't controlled.
I must say, I really credit the teachers in both these cases. They are the ones that took the sometimes quite difficult decision that Prevent needed to have a look at him. And in neither case did it work out. Rudder-Kobane was only 13 and 14 when these referrals were made, and they never got beyond the police. The police never passed them on to the multi-agency body that could have decided to provide Rudder-Kobane with the mentor that you could say he so badly needed. It just didn't happen.
Quite clearly, Prevent is not working as it was supposed to. You have various recommendations. Can you sort of boil down the essence of what needs to change for people listening?
First of all, I would push back on the idea that Prevent isn't working. Every time it fails, it becomes front-page news across the world. Every time it succeeds, no one gets to know about it.
Of course.
But of course it can be improved. And the first thing is this question of the violence-fixated individuals, violence-fascinated individuals. It has to be clear that they fall within Prevent. We don't want to waste time arguing about exactly the nature of the ideology that is in somebody's head. What you think about is the individual, what they need, the threat they pose, and then you get on and you do something about it. The other thing, I think, is Prevent needs to up its game online. They're dealing now with people who live a lot of their lives online. Most radicalisation now is online. That wouldn't have been the case 10, 15 years ago. And I'm not talking about anything spooky or sinister. I'm not calling for any new powers. In fact, police already do what they can to examine the traces that people leave on open source social media. The trouble is, it's not always done very professionally. It's not always done very quickly. It's not done very systematically. And I think we should have a national open source intelligence unit that could spread best practice and really take the online activity of these people as seriously as we take their offline lives.
So finally, to people listening who are just desperately worried about what's boiling away inside the heads of many adolescents around the country, you would say this is not an impossible task. Most of the time it works.
If you could have seen what I've seen, these intervention providers, these mentors who have turned young people around, and if you could speak to the young people who can describe how the scales fell from their eyes, you would not lose hope. Prevent is capable of working really well. I think my job and the job of other people working in Prevent is to try and make sure it does that more often.
Lord Anderson, David Anderson, thank you very much indeed for talking to me.
Thank you.
Now then, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz is due to arrive in London tomorrow to sign a wide-ranging British-German treaty covering a mutual defence pact and much more. I'm joined now by Germany's ambassador in London, Miguel Berger. Ambassador, it's great to have you back on the show. This is quite a big moment, particularly for defence. It follows the Trinity House agreement we had late last year. Just tell us a little bit about what defence-related things it'll cover.
Yes, Andrew, with pleasure. But let me first say that this is the first official visit of the new Chancellor to the United Kingdom. And we combine that with the signing of the first treaty between the United Kingdom and Germany. So
the first ever treaty.
First time that we do a treaty for our bilateral relations in our whole history. So that is really fantastic. It is a very broad-ranging agreement which covers 15, 16 areas from culture over energy, science, universities, mobility, but also what you mentioned, defense. And there, indeed, we can build on the Trinity House Defense Agreement, which really has strengthened very much our defense cooperation. And one example is a deep strike precision weapon we want to develop jointly and maybe also together with France.
Well, I've been reading about this on the government website. Can you tell me what a deep strike precision weapon actually is? Is it just another name for a big missile?
It's a name for a big missile which can reach up to 2,000 kilometers. And so if you look at the Storm Shadow, currently 300, the German Taurus system 500. So it means we need some time to develop that and master the technology. But there is a determination to do that.
And this is going to be done jointly by Germany and Britain working together.
Definitely. And we also hope for other European countries to join us. And it will be part, I think, of the cooperation with the European Union, the so-called SAFE program, 150 billion, where British companies will be part of.
And I've also read that a German company called Stark is going to be manufacturing effectively AI-controlled drones in Swindon, in the factory that used to produce Spitfires.
Yeah, very interesting example. And what we want to see is obviously that out of this cooperation, we will strengthen industrial capacities, create jobs, and create the skills we need in the defense sector.
Now, one of the things I know you have been very, very keen on as ambassador is more youth programs, more young German people coming here, more of us, our younger people going to Germany. How much progress are you making about that?
So the youth exchange program will be dealt by the European Union. It was part of the summit. What we are going to do is to see where we can reduce obstacles for school trips, for youth exchanges. So very much along what President Macron said during his state visit, that we need to bring our societies closer together. That is the same aim for Chancellor Merz.
Now, you've been here for a while, Ambassador. And this, I hadn't realised this was the first ever treaty between our countries. It's an extraordinary moment. Just your reflections on what's happened to the British-German relationship in your time.
I would say that we are really at a very different situation right now than when I arrived 3 years ago. And it was, for all of us, very good to see that we are moving forward on the EU-UK relation with the summit, with the things we have agreed we will be working upon, but that we do the same thing on the bilateral side. Really explore cooperation which makes sense and which will deliver results for the people.
And do you think a certain Donald Trump has been a big part of the story?
I think that it definitely helped to look at the world around us and the necessity for countries in Europe to stay together and work together.
Final question. One of the things that's changed is that we're going to be allowed to use the famous e-gates across many European countries. When will British people travelling to Germany, do you know, be able to use e-gates and go straight through?
We don't have a fixed date, but we are working on that. What we are doing is, like the United Kingdom, introduce a new entry system, which will come in the autumn. That means people have to pre-register before they can go to the European Union. This needs to be up and running, and then we will look at the e-gates. But we have understood, and we see that on a daily basis, how important the question of e-gates is for British citizens.
And finally, do you think, looking at this Labour government, that Britain is moving back into the orbit of the EU?
I would not put it like that. I think we all have accepted the situation we are in, and we try to make the best out of it. And that means cooperation, making things easier for our business, for our people. And that is the objective of our policy.
Miguel, Ambassador Berger, thank you very, very much for coming in. Big day for you tomorrow. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
The latest split in the MAGA movement is over the disgraced financier and paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. I'll be speaking with his former lawyer and another barrister who represented his victims. But the time now 6:31, and Amelia Cox has her news headlines.
One of the 4 Labour MPs who has been suspended by the Prime Minister has told LBC he's devastated. Speaking on Tonight with Andrew Marr, Brian Leishman was one of those who led the rebellion on welfare reforms. A review of the government's counter-terror programme has called for it to widen its remit to include people obsessed with violence. Lord Anderson was asked to look at what lessons could be learned from the murders of Sir David Amess and the Southport stabbings. And a 19-year-old has avoided becoming the youngest person to be handed a whole life order. Nicholas Prosper was sentenced to at least 49 years after he murdered 3 members of his family in Luton in 2023. LBC weather, light rain across Wales and southwest England tonight. A few showers for Northern Ireland, lows of 9 degrees.
LBC.
Or over.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:33. This isn't my usual kind of story, but it's a really telling morality tale for our times. I'm talking about the Epstein files, currently ripping apart the Make America Great Again movement in the US. Jeffrey Epstein, you will recall, was the well-connected paedophile sex criminal whose friends included Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton and the younger Donald Trump. He would fly other predators as well as underage girls on the so-called Lolita Express to his private island, and whatever happened there was probably filmed, probably recorded. Ever since Epstein died in prison, there have been persistent rumours of a grand dossier containing the names of his sex clients. Conspiracy theorists believe lots of liberal elite names would be on it, and they gleefully assumed it would be released once Trump became president again. But Trump himself no longer seems keen.
But I don't understand why the Jeffrey Epstein case would be of interest to anybody. It's pretty boring stuff. It's sordid, but it's boring. And I don't understand why it keeps going. I think really only pretty bad people, including fake news, want to keep something like that going. But credible information, let them give it. Anything that's credible, I would say, let them have it.
Extraordinary. Let's talk now to Jeffrey Epstein's former attorney, David Schoen. Did he think there was ever a list?
I don't believe there was, and I certainly don't believe any blackmail theory. He had nothing like that in mind, and had he had a list, I would assert that it would have been in his best interest at the time when he faced an indictment to have used anyone and everyone on that list to his advantage.
And he didn't, and therefore he probably didn't have the information. But right across America, indeed across a lot of the world, many people are convinced that such a list exists, that it's sitting in front of the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. Why do you think there's such a desire to believe in the list?
Well, I think there are a couple of things at work. First of all, I think there's pure, the tantalizing, prurient interest in such a list if it were to exist, and in Jeffrey Epstein's lifestyle and so on. But secondly, I think that, a number of people made a major issue in political campaign of finally exposing all of the documents and this list without really knowing what they were talking about. It's ironic that all of the criticism now is coming to the Trump administration when certainly the Biden administration would have had all of the same files. And that leads to another point, by the way. You can be sure in this day and age that if there had been such a list and other information people think it exists out there, it would have been leaked long ago. It would have passed through many hands, including state and local and federal law enforcement officials and others who could have profited off of any such list.
Do you think there was a kind of desire to believe in a conspiracy of the liberal elite all misbehaving in gross ways that ordinary folks couldn't ever think about?
I think that's true, and they had the germ of a reason for it, given that there were many wealthy and famous people who hung around Jeffrey Epstein, went on trips with him, went on his plane with him, visited it with him, and so on, and they loved that relationship. But once he was indicted, they all, never knew anything about him, and they cut their ties, and so on, which was, I thought, a bit unseemly, but I understand the way politics and human nature works, I suppose.
Well, we've all seen the films of the younger Donald Trump with Jeffrey Epstein at parties and so forth. The president is visibly really quite irritated by this story going on and on. He said only very bad people are interested in it. It's boring, it's sordid. Why do you think he's so annoyed?
I think he's annoyed for a number of reasons. First of all, as I made clear in a post I made on Twitter a while ago, Jeffrey Epstein had absolutely no kind of dirt or any kind of illegal or inappropriate conduct by information about Donald Trump. That's clear. I discussed it with him in detail, and he wanted those facts out there. But I think he's also upset because he feels that he's accomplishing a great deal in his administration, and there are many important issues going on, Middle East issues, economy, tariffs, and all of those things, which are appropriate for public discussion. But everything seems to be getting sidelined now by people purportedly in his camp, people like Tucker Carlson, who, has been a supporter, but is now sort of way out there conspiracy theorist, trying to put anti-Semitic views into it and all of these Zionist conspiracies and that sort of thing. And then on the left, he sees the New York Times and some members of Congress really sowing the chaos for their own purpose. And they love to see the dissension and encourage the dissension within the ranks.
Let me ask you about Jeffrey Epstein himself. Again, this is a widespread conspiracy theory, as you know, that he did not kill himself in prison, but that he was murdered. What's your view?
My view always has been that he did not kill himself. I have no concrete facts to base it on. I don't have a theory as to who killed him, and I don't subscribe to conspiracy theory. But I base my opinion on two facts. One anecdotal. I met with him 9 days before he was found dead. He hired me on that occasion. We set up a meeting. I told him that I wanted to meet. He had a whole battery of fine lawyers, and he wanted me to lead the team. They didn't know me. So I said I want to either have a meeting with them and have them accept me, or if they reject me, I would put together my own team, which I already had done. So that meeting was to be upcoming. Secondly, during the course of that week, I understand from local lawyers there that he was giving instructions based on the strategy we had discussed right up until the day before he died. But maybe most importantly, Michael Baden, who I consider to be the topmost forensic pathologist in the world, examined him with the assistant medical examiner for the city of New York a few days after his death, that Monday, after the Saturday when he died. He said that, first of all, the assistant medical examiner could not come to any conclusion, then 4 days later changed that to suicide without any additional evidence. But more importantly, Michael Baden himself, who's done tens of thousands of autopsies, said that he has never in his career seen injuries like this consistent with a suicide. So that's what I base mine on, and calls I've had from other inmates saying it was impossible in that cell, it didn't make sense, and that sort of thing. But nobody knows, nobody really will know, I think.
A very murky story. What was his frame of mind? What was he like the last time you spoke to him?
Well, he was fine. During the course of our visit, we had about a 5-hour visit, this 9 days before he died. A prison psychologist or psychiatrist visited him because there was this rumor that 2 weeks earlier he had tried to commit suicide. It wasn't that at all. He had a very rough cellmate who did something, but he didn't want to discuss it any further because he was afraid in there. But his frame of mind in going forward with the case was terrific. We were prepared to fight the case. We mapped out a strategy, and he was very excited about that and told everyone so. In fact, I got calls from some of the local lawyers where the previous lawyers had had go to see him, and they were very excited also, and they talked about his excitement about going forward and the instructions he was giving them and so on. So that was his frame of mind. He hated it in there. It was filthy. He was put in with people he had nothing in common with, obviously, and he was concerned about, extortion threats and that sort of thing.
And since I'm talking to you from London, I have to ask, did he talk at all about Ghislaine Maxwell?
No.
Never mentioned that. A very, very hard up question, perhaps, because he is seen as this kind of demonic figure now. How did you find him as a human being?
I found him, I think, the same way that many of the people who enjoyed his company found him. He was engaging. He was focused. He was a very bright guy. I never saw this so-called monstrous side that people describe. He was a very engaging and clever sort of fellow, I thought, and I didn't see anything unseemly. And while I don't go into any details of what we discussed, I have very strong reason to believe that there was a lack of credibility for many of the accusations being made against him. I'll just give you one example. One of the people who was behind the criminal case, I saw after Epstein died, the lawyer giving press conferences that all the client wanted was a day in court. I have a letter that lawyer wrote before Jeffrey Epstein died saying, I'm going to the press with this information, just laying out information that was in the public domain. Epstein said he never heard of any such person. And the letter said, for $25 million, my client will go away, in effect. Otherwise, we're going to the media. That's not someone who just wanted their day in court. And so every client I've ever had is presumed to be innocent until proven guilty. And Jeffrey Epstein was never brought to trial on these charges.
Well, fascinating to talk to you, Mr. Schoen. Thank you so much for talking to LBC.
Thank you very much.
Well, Gloria Allred, the American attorney who's represented more than 20 of Jeffrey Epstein's victims, was listening to that interview with David Schoen. And I'm guessing, Gloria, you won't necessarily agree with what he had to say. A very engaging and pleasant kind of guy.
Well, obviously, he wouldn't have been there when Jeffrey Epstein was sexually abusing underage girls and trafficking them, sexually trafficking them to others or for his own purposes. So I do think that I would respectfully disagree with him. And there is a lot of evidence, I'm sure, of sex trafficking. Now, this is the reason I'm saying this, because he was being prosecuted, that is Epstein, by the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York. And that arrest, that indictment of Jeffrey Epstein in New York would not have taken place unless the United States Attorney had fully reviewed any investigation that the FBI had done of Mr. Epstein, and also that the United States Attorney would have concluded that it was likely that Mr. Epstein would be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Because no U.S. attorney, for that matter, no state attorney or county attorney, will proceed with a high-profile criminal case unless they feel there's a high likelihood that there's enough evidence that the jury would find guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Of course, they won't know that until the jury is chosen and returns a verdict. But I'm saying that's my experience with prosecutors.
Yeah.
So there is a there, but we don't know what a jury would have concluded had Epstein lived to the point that a jury would have been able to deliver a verdict.
And Gloria, what's your own view about this very still widespreadly held belief that there is a long list of the private sex clients that's sitting perhaps on Pam Bondi, the Attorney General's desk, perhaps somewhere else, and that there's a conspiracy of silence. Powerful people just don't want it released into the public domain?
Well, I don't know whether there's a list or no list, but something in Jeffrey Epstein's mind in which he knew who he associated with and who might like to have the benefit of being, involved sexually with underage girls. Whether underage or adult women were being used as bait or as part of a transaction that Mr. Epstein had with very wealthy, in some cases high profile men. I guess we would have to wait to see. But I definitely am in favor of transparency. And I said last night on CNN, and I still hold this belief, that the files of the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, which of course would be under the Justice Department, the total file which was being used to prosecute him should be made public, not picked through to decide what is credible and what is not credible, but for the public, in the court of public opinion, to come to whatever conclusions they are going to come to based on evidence in the file. And it is this is a major moment for this administration. This morning, I know that the president was attacking some of his own supporters in the MAGA movement, calling them weaklings and other names for them, because obviously he would like to discuss other topics. But we'll have to wait to see. Meanwhile, the victims, many of them are being used, I would say, as political football, which is very unfair to victims. I do think the files should be released, but the victims must be protected. Their names should be redacted. Their identity should not be disclosed. And definitely any images, sexual images, that Mr. Epstein might have taken and retained, which might or might not be used to blackmail either some of the men or the victims or both, should never be revealed to the public.
Yeah, of course. And Gloria, just on that subject, reflect a little bit on the enormous damage done to the victims, because their voices are mostly not out there. You will know them. You will have spoken to them. Many years have passed now, but presumably these are people whose lives have been ruined by this very engaging and pleasant man.
Well, for many of them, this whole public discussion is now traumatizing and triggering to them to have to relive it. And they've had their hopes dashed to learn the truth many times, Andrew. So, for example, when Epstein was arrested in Florida and was the subject of prosecution, ultimately entered a plea and got a really light sentence, they had hopes that he'd be prosecuted and a lot of the truth would come out. It didn't happen. The United States Attorney pushed it down to the state, and Epstein got a very light sentence. Now, and I'm going to mention Ms. Maxwell, which I know you're interested in because you spoke to Epstein's attorney about it. Then Mr. Epstein was later prosecuted in New York, arrested. And again, many of the victims thought, okay, this time through the prosecution, we will learn everything we need to know. It didn't happen because he was either the victim of homicide or committed suicide. So
Which do you think it was?
Again.
Gloria, sorry, very briefly, we're out of time, really.
I don't feel that I have enough evidence to know one way or another, and that's why I mention it, Andrew. But now he's not coming out, and now there's an opportunity to have it come out.
Gloria Allred, thank you very, very much for talking to LBC. A new review has said that the NHS physician associates should no longer be able to diagnose patients after cases where illnesses have been missed, sometimes with tragic consequences. I'm going to be asking a mother and father who lost their daughter if this report goes far enough, but the time now is 6:50.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
Just as a new left-wing party is about to launch and he's got the Tories on the run, Keir Starmer suspends 4 Labour MPs. He's going from Mr Bean to Stalin, isn't he?
Ian Dale on LBC. risk. This is LBC. Message Andrew Marr on WhatsApp now on 0345 6060 973.
6:52. The use of physician associates employed in the NHS as substitutes for doctors, but with significantly less training, should be reformed and reviewed, according to a new report. Professor Gillian Leng says that the 3,500 plus PAs should be banned from diagnosing patients who haven't already had contact with a doctor. But the parents of Emily Chesterton, who died in November 2022 from a blood clot which was missed by a physician associate, think the report doesn't go far enough. And Marion and Brendan join me now. Thank you so much for talking to us. A very difficult subject. There's quite large parts of this report that you approve of and like, I gather. Marion.
Yes, that's true. We do approve of most of the review. And we think that Professor Lang has recognised the problems surrounding this area and that she has really, come to terms with how to improve things.
When I come to your daughter, one of the things that struck me was that she didn't realise that she wasn't talking, Brendan, to a doctor.
That's correct. She visited the surgery on the first time and was seen by this physician's associate who prescribed her paracetamol for pain in her calf. She was in a lot of pain. She went back a few weeks later and same complaint. She saw the same physician's associate and was given propranolol. And but she didn't realise, and we didn't realise that she'd seen a physician's associate. They didn't introduce themselves as such. No. And it wasn't until the inquest that we found out that she'd seen a physician's associate on both occasions.
And Marion, if she had come back to you and said, no, I couldn't see a doctor, it was a physician associate, would you have encouraged her to go back and demand a doctor?
Most certainly. We would have done, because she was ill and we could see that. But when she came out of the doctor's surgery, she said, look, I've seen the doctor. The doctor's not worried. There's nothing seriously wrong. But no one had any idea that she hadn't seen a fully trained doctor.
Yeah, with tragic consequences. So the part of the report you don't think goes far enough is that it would still allow physician associates to prescribe drugs, and you think that's
Definitely.
Wrong? Is that...
Definitely. I think it's a very dangerous thing to allow. In Emily's case, the prescription of propranolol had a devastating effect on her because of the pulmonary embolism. The beta blocker affected her heart. So once she'd taken it, she said straight away, I feel weird. We'd encouraged her to take it because she was told to when she felt breathless. Yeah. And she collapsed. And they had to give her an antidote at the hospital before they could even begin to work on her. So that was devastating for us.
Well, what an appalling thing for anyone to go through. Thank you both very much for talking to LBC. It's a message which I'm sure will be heard by parents and relatives and people all around the country. Thank you so much. Now, we were talking about climate change and adaptation earlier in the week, and there has been a dramatic development today. More than a third of people living on the Pacific island state of Tuvalu, the world's second lowest lying country, have entered a ballot for the very first climate visa, which would allow 280 of them to permanently migrate to Australia. Is this the beginning of the first evacuation of a country because of climate change? Let's talk to the programme manager of the Climate and Migration Coalition, Alex Randall. Let me come straight to that question. Is this the first time we've started to see a country evacuating?
I certainly think this is the beginning of something much bigger. I think what we need to be clear about, though, is that climate-driven migration is already happening across the world. We've got cases like this that have made the news, but for many years now, we've already seen climate-related disasters, hurricanes, typhoons, flash floods, becoming more frequent, more severe, more powerful, and those displace people every year, between 10 and 20 million yearly. And those people are already moving as a result of climate change.
And is it fair to say that it is basically sub-Saharan Africa that is feeling the worst of it at the moment, and that's where the really big movements of people are coming from?
I think we need to be really clear about one thing, which is that most of this migration that we will see is at the moment internal. people are moving within their own country. So yes, Tuvalu is making the news because they're applying for visas and potentially some of them are moving to Australia. But the vast majority of people who are impacted by climate change and who use migration as a way of surviving it move within their own country and very often don't move very far. So I think it's important that we are kind of in touch with reality about what's happening. This isn't necessarily going to be a huge surge of people, for example, wanting to come to the UK, which I think, is the question on many people's minds. Initially, what we're seeing is internal migration, people moving because of disasters. But I think that going forward, we will need to see more policies like the one that Australia and Tuvalu have introduced that allow people to escape the worst impacts of climate change to places where they will be safer.
And this particular case is really about sea levels. There was a report this week saying that UK sea levels have risen by about 13 centimetres over quite a long time. And that doesn't seem to people very much to worry about. But can you just put that into context and talk a little bit about what's happening to sea levels around the world and coastal cities and their vulnerability?
Of course. I think when you think about 13 centimetres, it doesn't feel like an awful lot of sea level rise. But I think what we have to remember is that even small amounts of sea level rise can begin to do things like introduce salt water into crop growing areas, right? So it may not be that people are literally fleeing the rising sea, but they may be fleeing the fact that the area which they used to farm has now become infertile due to saltwater intrusion. They can't make a livelihood, so they need to look elsewhere for work. And it's those secondary effects of sea level rise that we're really starting to see driving new patterns of migration.
A big issue, a serious issue to end tonight on. Alex, thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you.
I'm going to be back with you tomorrow. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download now for free from the App Store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 10 on LBC, Henry Riley. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew. Remember that PMQs when Vince Cable accused Gordon Brown of transforming from Stalin into Mr. Bean? Well, this afternoon, Keir Starmer has gone the other way and has gone from Mr. Bean to Stalin. He's withdrawn the Labour whip from 4 backbenchers who've had the temerity to oppose the government on welfare reform. Just as a new left-wing party is about to launch, I cannot imagine what he thinks he's doing. Can you?